Next guest has worn many hats, not one today though, a musician and author and a former professional rugby player. He's also worn his heart on his sleeve as one of Ireland's leading mental health advocates.
Now he's back with his most personal work yet and joins to talk about his brand new book and album. It's Niall Breslin. Bressie, good morning to you.
How are you?
How are you?
Good to have you.
Congratulations, new book was out last week. The place that has never been wounded. Like, listen, like with the podcast, we're talking about rugby, we're talking about the Blizzards, we're talking about everything else. But I think what the people have come to see with you in the last couple of years is how deep you get in your mind with, you're a great thinker about the world and being and everything else. And to put it into paper, I think must have been an amazing thing for you to do.
Yeah, I think I kind of wrote the book more about the world. Like, one of the quotes I use in the world is this guy Krishnamurti saying, "It's no measure of sanity to be well adjusted to an insane world." Look at the world. And then people are telling us to be perfectly normal.
Now, this is my problem with the book, right? The writing's very small now for me, okay? And it's very...
The first thing he said, it's very small, Brit.
Like, you can tell you're doing a psychology PhD at the minute. What was that quote again?
The world, now you put me in step, Krishnamurti, is no measure of sanity to be well adjusted to an insane world. They know the people who are perfectly calm and find us all fine. I'm like, how are you not overwhelmed by it? Like, and I've said to people, it's perfectly normal to be overwhelmed. What you guys were talking about just before I came on, this isn't normal stuff. This is chaos, you know, and I think it's okay that we're feeling a bit rinsed in it.
And there's a thing John Oliver always says, you have to keep on saying, this is not normal. This is not normal. But we do adjust to it, unfortunately. And, you know, we need our brains to kind of make sense of what's happening around us. Like, you have to just kind of put the head down and get on with the day.
You do. And I think what happens as well with that is we often desensitise ourselves a little to be able to deal with it. We're not meant to see all of this all the time either. So I think it's a particularly, like, that's what the book's a lot about, the kind of chaos of the world, but also what goes on within our minds in the midst of it all. So that's the stuff I've kind of been studying and researching and looking at for 15 years now, you know?
There's a very interesting bit, because people would probably see you and think of you on stage and out on a pitch thinking, oh, he's got his stuff together here. But like, it's very interesting you talking about whenever you're in university, the panic attacks you had at the start, and then even playing rugby. Like, you actually took a handful of Xanax before matches. And I always know as a player, you like the drug testers, you know,
it's hardly a performance-enhancing drug, to be fair, Tommy, so I think it was all right in that
But it's very
But it's
true,
not what you want
like,
them to be found. You know, you get these I was drug tested many times playing rugby, and you're sitting there going, if this is the way they find out, you lose control. So it was just, but the thing about also music and stage, and the one thing I did like about playing sport and music was you don't have time to think. If you start getting all introspective on a rugby pitch, you're going to get, your backhanded to you, you know. So I think that's why I did those things. I didn't feel like I could think. Thinking was my problem.
But so this thinking, unfortunately, you know, we can be affected with it. When you were doing all of these other things, like, because you really have done a lot in your life, when did you discover that when you sat down that there was a lot going on? Did you always know when everything else was a distraction?
Yeah, I mean, I came back from the Middle East when I was 13. That's when I noticed it first. I was in, watching what we're seeing now, there was what is referred to as the 9-Day War, where the IDF started, like, obliterating southern Lebanon. We were there. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night, being almost thrown across my room because the whole room was vibrating, shaking. And it's the first time in my life I didn't feel safe. I felt completely unsafe. We were there right in the midst of all of that. So when I came home, I started having panic attacks, which was a pretty healthy reaction. To a war. But at the time, I thought it was asthma. So I kept getting tested for asthma because I couldn't breathe. I was having panic attacks all the time. So that was the kind of starting point, and then that kind of carried that through my teenage years.
Can I ask you what, like, being there, being in southern Lebanon, we're seeing it now, the IDF want to go in with ground troops. Yet again, we know we've got Irish soldiers who are based there. We've watched the RT documentary about how the communities kind of come together over there. And we do think about Private Sean Rooney as well. What was it like when something like that happened?
I think the Irish Defence Forces, the UN there, UNIFIL, were just so used to it. They were so used to it. It was so strange to watch it. But there was only a couple of families there because my dad was there for a long time, so he brought us with him. Yeah. So I couldn't cope, and I was just hitting puberty, so like, we had all the other stuff coming with it. So I was not able to cope with it. So when I came home, I think that was the starting point. that kind of unravelled then, because we didn't know how to address it or talk about it. That was the 90s.
Yeah.
And I remember coming home and Kurt Cobain died. And that had a huge impact on me because I was obsessed with Kurt Cobain.
Yeah.
And nobody was talking about it. And I was like, I'm not going to start talking about what I think's going on in my mind when I can see how kind of stigmatised it is. Yeah. So that was the starting point, and I kind of carry that through in my life until, I suppose, my 30s, and then I started dealing with it.
Yeah.
And family's a big part of your life as well. And I know accompanies this book there's an album as well, and each song is for a chapter. There's a chapter about your mum in it. And I think that's a real realisation for a lot of people.
Yeah, mum had a bit of a scare. The worst words you hear in any kind of medical jargon is routine procedure. She went in for a routine procedure, a heart biopsy, and it didn't go well. And she had she was very lucky to survive, to be honest with you, and in ICU and for many, many days and stuff like that. But it was kind of the idea of the midday moon was we've these people in our lives that kind of evolve around us, that culture is convincing us that there's something better than them. You know, there's something better in our phones. There's something better in the distractions that we're constantly bombarded with. There isn't. You know, that's the one thing you learn. The one thing we know for sure about the mind is that the most important part of it is our relationships and the people that surround us that we love. And I'd go home and I'd be with my mother and I'd be looking at my phone. Like, no, never again. Until because there'll come a point where you don't have a choice anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of midday moon, and, sitting in hospital with her where we thought we were going to lose her. I was like, right, from now on, she is, she's my midday moon, and the idea is the moon's always in the sky. You just don't always see it, and that was the kind of theme behind it.
So this book, tell us exactly what it is. It's in different acts, it's in different chapters. We know we've talked to you before about the album, which is beautiful pieces of music on it, really stunning. It was absolutely gorgeous. So tell us what is the book, how you've broken it up, and what's going on.
So it's 4 acts. Act 1 is the Polaris principles. So they're the principles you take when you go into your inner world, when you go into meditation, whatever you want to call it. And everyone's kind of trying to find ways into sitting with themselves. The Polaris principles are tools to do it. Dukas came from my conversations with Monca McGann, my friend, and he used to talk about the land is almost inherited to us. It's part of us. It's in us. And I thought that we have this beautiful land in Ireland that we keep missing. And we see our environment as something to exploit rather than something to experience. And I think the land has a huge part to play in it. Act 3 is meta, which is love and kindness. It's basically the people that surround us and how we actually start connecting with them again and being present with them. And Act 4 is the place that's never been wounded. So that's the place that's never been wounded is the steady part of us when the world is shaken. And by God, the world has been shaken for a couple of years. So I think there's something that got us through. What was it that got us through? And I think in wellness, I think we talk about this a lot, Myrna, that it keeps telling us what we don't have, or what we need more of, or what we got to do more of. It never acknowledges that there's something in us that's got us this far. And everybody goes through things in life. Every one of us. No one gets out of this world unscathed. And I think that's the part I want to bring out in people, that part of them that has got them here and continues to move them forward.
So for people that are seeing the news every morning, how do you become steady in an unsteady world?
I don't think you can become steady with that. That normalises it, and we shouldn't normalise it. I think for me, becoming steady in an unsteady world is understanding there's part of us that connects us to everyone around us. Like, people have different words for it. Spirituality, it can be soul, it can be religion, whatever it is. But whatever it is, there's something in us, I think, that we have to connect with. And I think the two things I know for certain, in all my work, in all my study, that we need more than anything is community and peer support. And the problem with modern culture is we're eroding community. We think community is online. It isn't. Community is face-to-face. It's in your GAA clubs, it's in your rugby clubs, it's in your band, it's in your music, that's your community. And we got to work extra hard to connect with community now. At a time when the world feels pretty divided, how do we bring it together? And we have to, because that's what actually keeps us sane in this madness and stops us normalising it, because it's just not normal.
With all of this, you wrote about your mum, you wrote about a miscarriage experience that yourself and your partner Louise had, and then you've written about very, very personal things that are in your life in a greater context, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're going from the particular to the general, do you think it's important that people see the general? Because there's a lot of main character energy happening in the world right now, whereas if it doesn't affect me, well, why are you talking about that?
Yeah.
So in doing specific things for you and widen that out, do you think we all have to start doing that a little bit more? Seeing other people, you're talking about community here.
I think relatability is so important, being able to relate to someone. And everybody listening to this can relate to one thing. So one of the themes of the book is this idea of changing, and even grief. Like, grief is a weird thing. No one knows how to navigate it. There's no framework. There's no book that perfectly explains it. It's an experiential thing, something you have to go through to actually to understand it. And I think relatability, 3 things I think get through to people. Relatability, because that moves them from their head into their heart. They start feeling it rather than thinking it. Irish people are very good at thinking things. We're a bit hairy at kind of feeling them, and actually, because we're terrified to. The other thing is vulnerability. I think I've heard, I can't remember which rugby player it was, he said it's okay, you can be both powerful and vulnerable at the same time. They're not. They're actually closely aligned. Yeah. And then the third one is functionality. What do we do with that? How do we tell people to actually hold that and handle that? And one of the ways I do it is to actually sit with it. You know, don't push it away. Don't pretend it's not there. Sit with it. And I think the tools that I'm trying to create is to sit with that stuff. And sometimes, you know, you can't avoid it. And that's all it is. And also, that's not a book written from a perspective of self-help. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. Anyone who comes on any show and tells you they've it all figured out isn't telling you the truth.
Yeah.
We've been trying to study this thing for hundreds of years. And I always say that if, say, Michelangelo and Da Vinci grew up in Ireland in the 50s, we would have put them into asylums. That's what we did. We didn't understand things, so we pushed them away. So I think we shouldn't fear it so much. The human mind is there to be understood. And one of the ideas of the book is learn how to observe your mind rather than be completely submerged in it, because that's what I used to be.
He makes me feel better every single time I speak to him. The book is called The Place That Has Never Been Wounded by Niall Breslin. Absolutely gorgeous. And thank you so much for being with us today, Niall. We always appreciate it. Thanks
the
a million.
music as well, Bressie.
Beautiful.
Top class. Love it.
So